Okay, I'll get started. Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming tonight to the Zoom talk. Tonight we have, well, we're very privileged to have Sue Tompkins talking, and she's one of Britain's leading astrologers. Sue's interest in astrology, I believe, began in her childhood, and where she developed a keen interest in people and life's bigger questions. And then in her later teenage years, her knowledge increased as she read more about the subject, and then she later went on to study with many internationally respected astrologers. And then later she studied with, she went on to found a co-found a school of her own, the London School of Astrology. She's a homeopath, and she sees a natural connection between astrology and homeopathy, describing both as holistic practices. She compares astrology to homeopathy's like cures like principle, viewing astrological consultations as a mirror for self-reflection. She has described her approach to astrology as contemporary psychological. So she is less interested in traditional astrology, I understand, and prefers empirical observation and metaphorical thinking, which helps individuals understand the why and how of situations rather than just predicting the outcomes. So again, my understanding is that rather than entirely dismissing prediction, she believes more in a dialogue between the astrologer and client, a dialogue that can change one's future by shifting perceptions and enhancing self-awareness and encouraging free will and responsibility. Now, Sue will be happy to take questions at the end, but if you're dying to ask something during the talk, do put your hand up. I'll do my best to spot you, and we can just pause and you can ask a question. Otherwise, we'll have a Q&A at the end. Okay, well, over to you, Sue. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Okay, yes, well, where to start? Yes. So the word astrology comes from astra, star, and logos, wisdom. So it's literally wisdom of the stars. Or you could say, or Wikipedia says something like, the study of the correlation between the movement and relative positions of the planets and other celestial bodies, maybe, to human affairs and to the world at large.
I think I just need to, I've can't see your slides have become very small. Sorry, I don't know if I've done something.
Okay, all right. Shall I stop share and start again?
Yes, please. Maybe
Let's see if that works.
Sorry about that.
All right. Let's see if that helps.
Yes, that's better. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Now, astrology has a very long history, but I don't know. I mean, history is not my subject. But, you know, reference to some form of astrology can probably be traced to most cultures since time immemorial, really. There's certainly evidence on bones and cave walls that show that lunar cycles, the cycles of the moon, were noted at least 25,000 years ago. Together with their study on crops and tides. But Babylonian astrology is thought to be the first organized system of astrology, and it dates from maybe the second millennium BC. I think they say BCE now, but anyway, a very long time ago. Babylonia, I think, is pretty much Iraq as we would know it now. And okay, so one of the huge questions about astrology is, you know, how can it work and all of that sort of stuff, which there is no easy answers to. But all astrologers would agree with the second hermetic principle. I can talk about the others later if you want. But the idea of as above, so below, as within, so without. And it basically means that everything, thought, energy, matter, whatever, is connected. What happens on one plane of existence will happen on another plane of existence. So as above, so below. What's happening in the heavens is reflected on Earth. You can also go much further with this, really, because you can say what happens within will happen outside of us. You can think even of your illnesses, how they will be a reflection of something that's going on psychologically. You don't have to buy that. That's what I suppose I believe. And to an extent, I suppose, if you speak the language, can prove. So as above, so below, everything related to each other. Let's just think what the horoscope is. So just imagine you've got a horizon. We've all got a horizon. Our horizons will be slightly different. And if we were in a different country entirely, the horizon would be quite different. But anyway, you have your horizon. And from that perspective, it looks as if the sun rises in the east and is overhead around lunchtime, and then sets in the evening and then disappears until sunrise again. So from our perspective, it looks as if the sun goes around us. And from this same perspective, if you can, which planets or whatever you can see, it also looks as if the other planets go around us like that. That's what it looks like. Of course, we know, so that's called a geocentric view of the universe, really. So under this model, the sun, moon, stars and planets circle the Earth. And astrology is about human experience, and that is what we experience. It seems as if the sun, moon, planets, whatever, revolve around the Earth. Of course, we know that's not true. I'll come to that after. We know from Copernicus that, in fact, our universe is heliocentric. The sun is in the middle, and the Earth, and indeed all the other planets, rotate around it. And he may have been the first to say that, but actually it's probably the case that some of the ancient Greeks knew it. So, but anyway, and we can actually draw a horoscope from the heliocentric, sun-centered perspective. But that's not usually used. We use the geocentric position. So the Earth is in the middle. And the idea of zodiac probably comes from the idea of zoo and zodiac. And the zodiac is the apparent path of the sun around the Earth. So it's not the real path, but it's what seems to happen. Okay, so learning astrology is very much like learning a language. So if you're a teacher of astrology, as I am, you first of all teach the alphabet. And the alphabet is composed of the 12 signs that you'll be familiar with, you know, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, whatever, and the planets. And we call the sun and moon planets just for ease. They're also known as the luminaries. And, well, we still put Pluto in. Pluto's no longer called a planet. But anyway, so we use at least the 10 planets. And some astrologers use other things. There are other things we might use. And then there's 12 houses. And there's, if you can see in this picture, you see there's lots of lines, blue lines and red lines. And these are called aspects. So basically the relationships of the different planets to each other. And this actual map here is for 7:30 this evening in London. All right. I'm going to stop share and go to something else for a minute. Share. Yes, I'll go. Oh, no. No, not there. Oh, there. Okay. So that is the same 7:30 chart here. But I'm just going to move it. I'm going to animate it. So I could move it by the minute if I want to, or by the second. But I'll do it by the hour. So that's 7:30. That was 6:30, 5:30, 4:30. We can carry on till there's a 7:30, 8:30, 9:30, 10:30, and so on and so forth. And the thing about your horoscope or my horoscope is that no two horoscopes are the same. They're each as unique as a fingerprint. Like a fingerprint, of course, is made up of certain patterns, walls, and I can't remember what all of them are, but each fingerprint is pretty much unique. And a horoscope certainly is. Because although the moon, for example, is at 6:37 of Taurus every month, and the sun at 25 of Libra every year, some of these other planets move very slowly. Saturn in the same place every 29 years, and so on and so forth. I'll say more about that later on, perhaps. But the horoscope, although everything in it has been seen before, historically, together in relationship with each other, they haven't. Each horoscope is unique. And as such, if the astrologer looks at a horoscope, well, they've never seen it before. They have to use the alphabet, if you like, to decide what it might mean, if that is what they're being asked to do. Right, so we're back there. Now, so we should be back to where we were a minute ago. All right. And astrology is used for lots of different purposes. So natal astrology, the astrology you've kind of heard of, the astrology of the individual, you know, who am I kind of thing? Why am I here? You know, this is mostly how astrologers earn their money, really. People want their chart interpreted. They want to understand the situation they are in, and so on. Okay. And then you can also have medical astrology here too. Although medical astrology is a little bit in the dark ages, but it's one of my particular interests, medical astrology. There's mundane astrology, which is basically political astrology, world astrology, financial astrology, and you can have weather forecasting as well. Basically, you can apply astrology to anything, but you have to know about the subject you're applying it to. So, for example, I can't do financial astrology. I don't know anything about the stock market. Weather forecasting slightly, but not much. Political astrology, world astrology, takes enormous amount. You really have to know the history and the politics of the given country. It's not enough to know astrology. And then astrology is sometimes used to elect a chart. So people into astrology or vaguely knows it works might ask an astrologer to find the best date and time to get married. That's a very common thing that one get asked to do. Or to open a business, or for anything really. People do sometimes do that. And then there's a form of astrology called horary, which comes from the same source as hour. It's the astrology of questions. I've lost my purse. Where is it? Will I get it back? Now, horary astrology belongs in a very traditional type of astrology. It has its own set of rules. And it's not something I can only do very basic astrology, but horary astrology. But in the hands of a qualified, experienced horary astrologer, they can answer those questions. One of the big astrologers of the 1600s, William Lilly, actually answered one of, there'd been a theft, and he said where the thief was, and where, I think it was some fish that had been stolen, I've forgotten the story really, but was able to get them back and so on. And I was actually at an astrology summer school, probably about 30 years ago now, and a colleague who was an horary astrologer, somebody had actually, we were in a university building, one of the Oxford universities, and some thief had got in and they'd stolen something. And the astrologer was able to say, go to the 3rd floor, look behind the toilet where the cistern is, and you'll find your purse or bag or whatever it was. So the astrology, it can be used for lots of different things, but the main ways it's used is for the individual, for political astrology, and electional and horary also. Okay. Like, for example, all us astrologers are probably, or many of us, are a bit obsessed about who's going to win the American election, for example. Which, please don't ask me the answer to that question. Okay. Yes. So, as I said, a horoscope can be set up for anything, not just the birth of a person. So your dog, your cat, the moment a question comes to you. For tonight, we had a horoscope for 7:30 tonight. So as I say, each horoscope is unique. And for someone to have the same horoscope as you, they have to have been born on the same day, the same year, at the same time, and in the same place. I want to say something about fate and free will, really. Which is kind of a huge subject, but just to think that the horoscope is a map, and the astrologer is a map reader. So it's not quite the same as being in the place, but you're a map reader. And you know how helpful a map is. If you're going somewhere, to see where you've been, to see where you can go. I know people use sat-nav now, but maps are still useful. But thinking of the analogy of a map, just imagine you might have a map of Venice or a map of the Kalahari or the map of Shanghai. The choices open to you will vary. So, there's no canals in the Kalahari. There's lots of canals in Venice. But if your map was of the Kalahari, for example, you wouldn't be able to go up a canal. Well, there's no mountains in Shanghai. So you could say that our map on a level is our fate. You could say that. But just think, so you can go anywhere in your map, but you can do that consciously or not. You can do that when you're walking up the road. Are you conscious of doing that, or you're just on automatic pilot? You can look around, you can extract meaning from your map or not. You can make the most of your journey or not. You can use the map to help you see where you are and where you may go or not. But the idea of where you go on your map, how you go, where you go, certainly where you go, has free will at it. So you've got your map, but there's free will there. And the whole subject of free will is a huge subject. It's something I sort of teach to students when I'm teaching forecasting, and you have to know quite a few things before we can get to that, really. But anything that you have conscious control of, well, you shouldn't be able to predict, really, because you have free will. But there's some things that happen in life that free will doesn't really come into it. You know, if the factory you work in is going to close down, you probably can't stop that happening. You might be able to, but you probably can't. But you can prepare for it and your attitude to it and all the rest of it. Anything about, you know, health of other people, you can only do so much. There are certain things you have free will, definite, and areas of life where you don't have too much free will. So it's those things that one is more able to predict. As I say, learning astrology is a bit like learning a language, and it is really. You know, if you were learning Spanish and you learn this week, please can I have a cup of coffee, whatever you say, just because you're told once, you won't remember it. You have to keep saying it. You have to practice. And astrology is a bit like that. Again, it's like you're learning an alphabet, really. So it takes a degree of application. And there's stuff about sun signs. I just want to say something about sun signs, really. What Nick, it was Nick, wasn't it? What Nick said to you wasn't quite the case. I was nursing when I was 18, and I picked up Linda Goodman's Sun Sign, which was a huge bestseller on sun signs. And my best friend when I was nursing was very typical of her sign, which was Gemini. It was so typical, and I felt I was typical of my sign too. Anyway, so I kind of just got stuck on sun signs for quite a while. Moved to Canada for a time, still stuck on sun signs, but I was living in a provincial city town in the UK. There weren't really books in bookshops. But when I went to Toronto, there were proper astrology books. So I started to learn a bit more. And then indeed I did do serious courses and eventually qualified. It takes some years to learn astrology, although you find what you learn is quite interesting and useful from the word go, really. Yes. And the thing about the sun signs, when I was in Toronto, I was at that point where I could guess people's sun signs. I could never do that now. I could pick up other things, but I could never do that now. But there is something in sun signs, particularly for some people, because some planets are quite near the sun, Mercury and Venus. So some people will have all three planets in the same sign, and they may resonate a bit more to their sun sign. Yeah, the stuff in newspapers, you know, this is what's going to happen to you today, this week, this month, this year, is rubbish, really. You know, there might be a happy coincidence, but it's rubbish and not really meaningful. I'm sorry, those of you who love it. You know, hey, why not if you do? But mostly it's not even written by astrologers these days. Sometimes still is. Used to be quite often. Astrologers who wanted to make a bit of money, basically. All right, let me just take you to a newspaper headline. I just wondered how I can get that. Down, yes. Okay, so this is the Metro newspaper, a London free newspaper on June the 28th, 2000. And so I was looking at the front page. So the front page at the top, it's the first review of the film Chicken Run. Okay, you know, that's the people who did Wallace and Gromit and all that sort of stuff. I'm a great fan of those films. So I noticed that the first review of Chicken Run. And then we're told, this is in the days of Tim Henman, the tennis player, we're told that on the sports section in the back page, Tim Henman will restore British pride. And over here we've got Nigella Lawson, obviously doing something on cooking. On Fear and Fowl is the title of her article. I suppose she's cooking chicken or something. And then the headline is Family Backs Dando Suspect. So this was the TV presenter Jill Dando who'd been murdered, and it's something about that. Okay. So what I noticed, so we've got Chicken Run, we've got Tim Henman, we've got Nigella Lawson on Fear and Fowl, and we've got Dando. And on that particular day, there were 4 planets in the sign of Cancer, Sun, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, and 3 planets in Taurus. And they're the 2 signs I'd associate with chickens, with fowl. So I was quite amused by this. And yeah, so a hen, female chicken, fowl, collective name for birds such as chickens. And even dando is very similar to the word dindon, which in French is turkey. I understand. One of my students told me that, so I don't know. But of course, the other headline was about family supports, family backs the suspect or whatever it is. And the word family, the issue of family is a very strong issue for the sign of Cancer. So I might make some, I can't remember what the other headline was. 5 survivors, car falls down a cliff. I don't know about that. I can't even remember what it says. But there you go. Okay. So, okay. Yes, and you can have fun with astrology. You may remember, well, 24th of April this year, cavalry horses escaped. They'd been spooked by something. Something had frightened them, and 5 or 6 of them ran out into London. Picture on the right, there's lots of blood. The horse got hurt. Happily, all the horses were caught. They all survived, and they're up and running, and there's not a problem with them now. But you see, the planet you might associate with horses, well, it would either be Jupiter or Neptune. But Jupiter in the sky was conjunct Uranus, and Uranus is a planet to associate with unexpected happenings and suddenness, sudden and unexpected. And here, this was an example of that. I won't talk about that. Well, this is the chart for Israel and, well, start of the war and so on, but we won't look at that right now anyway. I'm just going to stop for a minute and show you, where's stop share? I'm going to stop share and go to somewhere else. Oh, yes. I just want to point something out to you. So this is a few, so of the planets, we, as I say, count Pluto as a planet, even though, so Pluto was demoted, actually. But you see, I find that meaningful because Pluto is a planet one would associate with demotion. Like people, when they have Pluto going over the area of their chart to do with career, Pluto going over there, well, it's the kind of time you get made redundant. Anyway, Uranus, Neptune and Pluto have only been discovered in the last 250 years. They're sometimes known as the extra-Saturnians. So they were unknown to ancient astrologers. And you can think about how life has changed. You know, you could even think about your grandparents or your great-grandparents. They wouldn't have had electricity. They wouldn't have had a, you know, fridge. They certainly wouldn't have had computers or Wi-Fi. They wouldn't have had a telephone, some of them, and so on and so forth. So, and if you spoke to somebody who was born in 1850 or something, and they said, I'm going to America next week, you would know that was a huge number. Whereas if I say to you, I'm going to the States next week, you wouldn't know if that was a major issue or not, for me personally. So these outer planets have, what should I say, they've coincided with many changes in society. And they can only be seen with the aid of a telescope. So Uranus spends 7 years in a sign, Neptune about 14 years in a sign, and Pluto somewhere between 14 and 30 years. So they move very, very slowly. Okay. And they describe the changes and the fashions in society. I won't go through all that. So there's Uranus, 84 years to go right the way round, which in occult terms used to be known as the life expectancy. Although we always say 70 years and 10 used to. 84 years, Uranus goes right the way round. And discovered in 1781. We won't go with that, but it coincided with the French Revolution, and it is a planet to associate with revolutions, with turning things over, which is what revolution means, to turn things over. The American War of Independence, and it's very concerned with independence. And the Enlightenment in Uranus. I won't bother to go in about all that. I won't bother to do that. And Neptune, so you'll never see a Neptune return. It takes 165 years to go right the way round, 14 years in a sign. Going back to Uranus, you see, it's things like technology, changes in inventions and technology and things that save time. And things really also with Uranus, sometimes that take us away from humanity in a way, take us to machines. Neptune is the planet that it's a planet of collective dreams and fantasies, which are often exemplified in music, in art. Now, I don't know about you, but most of you are my sort of age. When I was young, I swore I would never lose touch with modern music, so to speak. Have I? Of course I have. You know, if who's that famous woman at the moment? Can't think of her name. Big name. I couldn't tell you any of her songs. But you know, the fashion of yeah. And the thing about the discovery of Neptune, there was a scandal, really, because there was some argument about who had actually discovered it. I won't tell you the story. It's quite interesting, but I won't. And yeah, dissolving boundaries, oneness with the universe. I don't think we're going to do all of that. But yes, when Neptune was discovered, it coincided with the birth of spiritualism, with the Fox family, these taps, which people said were ghosts. And there was and then it emerged that one of them, I think Margaret, the oldest, had been doing that, had been doing the knocks and admitted it. But then there was another story that actually maybe it was true. But spiritualism took off, certainly around Europe and the States, very, very quickly. And that's one of the things that you put at Neptune's door, things that are spiritual, mystical, belong with Neptune, as well as things like gas lighting and anesthetics, take away pain. Anything, anyway, I won't go into all the details of it. But the point is that the outer planets in your chart will be different from where the outer planets are in your children's or your grandchildren's chart or your parents' chart. And they really describe the generation gaps. So not all planets are personal. They can have a personal effect in your chart, definitely. But by sign, they're certainly less personal. And like some planets move very quickly. As I say, the moon changes sign every 2.5 days. The sun does it once a month. They all have, Jupiter changes sign once a year. So they all have different speeds. And so it describes oneself and oneself in society, if one's looking at natal astrology, astrology of the individual. Oh yeah, this is an example of, I would have done this for my students. So Uranus was in Pisces. Pisces is ruled by Neptune, and Uranus rules Aquarius, and they were in each other's sign between 2003 and 2010. And this was the birth of, if you like, the digital world. Not the absolute birth, but when it really took off. So, people taking pictures on their phone or digital cameras to start with, hearing music on your phone, sat-nav, Wi-Fi, all of it, really. And that's described in the sky by these two planets in each other's sign. Oh, it's Pluto. It's actually back in Capricorn for a minute, but was in Capricorn between 2008 and 2023. It can be, when I was born, it was in Leo, where it was for about 30 years, if I remember rightly. And the thing about Pluto, Percival Lowell knew the planet existed in 1905 when he died. I can't remember, maybe 1915. I can't remember when he died. But it was found by this man, Clyde Tomby. He's the man who found it. But the interesting thing is some of that describes something of Pluto psychology. Pluto are things that are hidden, things that are buried, Hades in the underworld, hidden. And he had to die. It's a planet of death as well, sometimes. We won't go on there. The stock market, when it was discovered, 1930, we had the stock market crash and the Great Depression. We had the rise of fanaticism, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party, and there were lots of other things. The atomic bomb, the neutron was discovered, and depth psychology, Freud, Jung, Adler, and the idea of the unconscious. That also coincided with the discovery of Pluto. And we're continually making discoveries all the time, but it takes some years to understand what a new body is about. When I first started astrology, people were talking about Pluto, but I don't think it was till 25, 30 years ago that people had a good handle on what Pluto is about. So anyway, how are we doing? Let me look at time where I go from here. 8, 11. Oh, well, we're all right. Well, we're nearly at 45 minutes, but I'll carry on. I don't know whether there's anything else. Yeah, Pluto's orbit is very strange, which is why Pluto spends more time in some signs than others. It's very elliptical. And there are occasions when Pluto is actually closer to the Sun than Neptune, as it was between 1979 and 1999. Yeah, collectively and individually, Pluto describes attitudes and happenings deemed unacceptable by much of society. So the things people get embarrassed about. And again, you could go back to your childhood and think about things your parents didn't like to talk about. And that will vary by culture as well. You know, the mental illness in the family. Maybe that you're illegitimate. Maybe you're gay. Those sort of things at one time were taboo. So Pluto concerns itself with what is taboo in society, and often the taboos coming to light. So when Pluto was in Scorpio, for example, that's when we had AIDS. And so what came to light is that lots of people had a gay lifestyle. It brought the whole idea of sex into, discussion, shall we say. So what society or the family gets embarrassed by. It's also the planet of abuse and shame. And as I say, it's a death planet sometimes, but it's particularly death which is, murder or suicide or doesn't have to happen. All right, so I want to come out of that. Oh, I suppose I can stop here. Stop share. Well, let me see where I am on the other. Yes, do I want to do that? I'm just thinking what I want to do here. Yes, well, I could talk about elements. I could talk about some aspects of the horoscope if you wanted. I could talk about the other hermetic things.
Can I just put in? We do have a question from Vicky about the 12 houses, astrology charts. Could you talk about those, perhaps?
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I'm just wondering if I need to show you a different slide. Well, not every astrologer uses the houses for a start. But what are definitely very important is the ascendant and descendant. So this is an axis. The ascendant marks the beginning of the first house. So that angle, the ascendant, and the descendant, which marks the beginning of the seventh house, that's really based on your birth time and is very, very important. And then there's another angle called the MC and IC. It's not quite the highest point in the heavens. It would take too long to describe where it is. So 1, 7, 10, 4, people don't argue about, although you can put 10 and, well, no, that's too complicated to explain. But the other houses, there's different house systems. So those houses I've mentioned don't really get changed, but the other houses, the beginning of the second house, the third house, the fifth house, the sixth, the eighth, the ninth, the 11th and 12th, are based on how one decides to divide space and time. They're based on space and time. And over the centuries, astrologers have come up with different ways of dividing the houses. I don't know whether this is what you meant, Vicky, but most people, maybe 50% of people, use a system called Placidus, which was discovered by a monk, or actually slightly before a monk in the 1400s. Now, the houses, you can think, well, before we get to houses, so the planets are, they're like characters in a play. You know, you have the hero, you'll have the mother, you'll have the father, you'll have the siblings, you'll have whatever, you'll have different characters in a play. And then they're in different signs. So what kind of hero? Is it Mother Teresa? Is it Robin Hood? What kind of hero? So your sun will say something about that according to the sign it's in. The house shows in some sense where the drama takes place. So it's a bit like, it can also be like the sun is in a, like each of the houses mirror the signs. So the first house is a bit like Aries. The second house has stuff in common with Taurus and so on, the same order of the signs. Although in your chart, they'll be in a different order. Yeah, but the most important thing are the aspects, really, because if you can imagine, you have the play, so you have your actors, they're in costume, and they're in a place. Maybe they're in Sherwood Forest, or they're in a place. Maybe they're at work, the sixth house, or maybe they're with their kids in the fifth house, or doing creativity in the fifth house, or with their friends in the 11th, or whatever. They're in a place. But the aspects describe the drama, what the characters to say to each other, and what happens. They tell the story. Yeah, they tell the story, really. I don't know whether that answers your question, Vicky. And Vicky, I came to, I don't know whether you remember, but I came to one of your workshops once. Anyway, dowsing. Actually, coming back to the idea of dowsing, I would describe myself as somebody who can't dowse. I mean, I've been on quite a few I've been on a few dowsing courses. I've always been interested in dowsing, and so on. But sometimes when people don't have a birth time, astrologers decide to dowse for the birth time. And I don't trust that. I believe in dowsing, but unless the given astrologer is capable of dowsing water or diamonds or something that I can actually see, I don't trust it. And once again in the summer school I mentioned, there was somebody there who was going around dowsing everybody's birth time, and being rather naughty. I gave them I think somebody did it actually, but I was part of it. You know, this was somebody who did know their birth time, and the astrologer was asked to dowse the time, and of course they didn't match. So I'm a bit skeptical about dowsing for birth times. Some of you as proper dowsers probably can, maybe, but you have to be very, very careful because the birth time and the angles are very important. And it's true that some people don't have a time. That's unfortunate. They can see where their planets are, but they can't see what houses they're in. And in the case of the moon, they can't really see, because the moon moves so quickly, they don't necessarily know the aspects the moon's making. Okay. All right. Well, let's take another thought. Does that answer your question, Vicky? I don't know whether it does.
I'll ask her to unmute if she doesn't. Would you like to say anything, Vicky?
Does that answer your question, really?
There we are. Not quite. I was wondering what each aspect of the 12 houses were, like if you went to travel, or if you wanted to know about where work would be in your chart, where you'd find friends.
All right. Well, I'd have to
things like that.
Okay. Well, I'd have to teach you the houses, really. But let's say we're talking about. Well, let's say we're talking about travel, since you brought that up. That would be the 9th house, where you may or may not have a planet. If you don't have a planet, you look at the sign on the 9th house cusp and where the ruler of the 9th house cusp is. And that will tell you certain things. But the planet Jupiter may say something about travel. And actually, any planets in the sign Sagittarius may also say something about travel. So in terms of houses, the 9th house is the house of long distance travel. The opposite house, the 3rd house, is short distance travel. So, you know, going up the road. I guess a drive into Sheffield or something would come in the third house. But taking a major trip where you were exploring or something, taking a long flight, that would be the ninth house. And so each of the houses have a different area. Work you mentioned. So work, you know, there's different houses for work, really. There's the sixth house, which is work is in the idea of the rent you pay for life. Service. It's a house of service, really. And you as an employee, and employees in your life, and you might say, well, I don't have any employees. But, you know, you take something to the dry cleaners, your dry cleaner is like an employee, really. Pets come in the sixth house as well. And you might think, well, how can pets, and health comes in the sixth house. They're all quite complicated, but pets are like servants, really, and they keep us healthy and so on and so forth. The 10th house is much more about career, vocation, calling, us out in the public, us as an employer, and indeed our employers, our boss. And often a parent is up there too, the very first boss, the very first person we sought to impress. So houses, you know, I've just spent 3 weeks teaching the houses to my students in China. So obviously it'd be quicker if I didn't have to be translated, but you know, it's not something one can teach you immediately. What was the other example you said? Work, travel, family. Well, family is quite complicated because there's many members of your family. I mean, your father, for example, might be shown by your son, by any planets in the 10th house or the 4th house, by Saturn, what any of those are doing. And you might think, well, that's a bit ridiculous, but your father was many people. Even if he was missing, he was many people. You know, he might have gone fishing on Saturdays, he might have been an electrician, all sorts of things. And your mother is also any planet in the 10th and the 4th and the moon, and to some extent any planet in Cancer. And brothers and sisters could be Mercury or any planets in the 3rd house, and to a lesser extent any planets in the sign of Gemini. Mostly the 3rd house with brothers and sisters. In-laws in the 9th house. So it's quite complicated. Your partner, your wife, husband, partner, are the 7th house. But the 7th house is more than your partner as well. So that may say something about how you meet them, what they're like, or how you are with them, what they bring out in you. You might say all those sort of things, but it's actually the other. The ascendant is me, and at the 7th, it's us or we and the other. So you find a lot of therapists have sun in the 7th house, because the sun is about light, shedding light. So shedding light on the other person, or being light being shed on one by one's therapist. So it's all quite complicated.
Could I put it again? We have another question. Could you just say briefly something about the elements?
Yeah, well, I've got, I can do that. I can, yeah. I've done that with slides even. I thought you might. Okay, so perhaps the first thing you look at when you're looking at somebody's horoscope is whether there's an imbalance in one of the elements, fire, earth, air, water. So, you know, there's 3 signs in fire, 3 in earth, 3 in air, 3 in water. And there's also things called cardinal, fixed, mutable. So anyway, we won't go into that. And you can think about fire. Heat always rises. Water always goes to the lowest point. Air can go in any direction. Earth goes that way. You know, fire will always be hot and dry, and water will always be wet anyway, and so on. You can do a lot about elements there. And the fire and air signs tend to be yang in nature, sometimes expressed as masculine or positive, but the fire and air signs are more outgoing, extroverted, yeah, extrovert, whereas the earth and water signs are more yin in nature, so more concerned with inner subjective experience. And you can even have degrees of yin and yang, really. Fire, highest yang, if you like. Yin is the most, but I'll do, yeah, so the fire person. So, as I say, in some charts, the person will have an overemphasis or underemphasis on a particular element. And it's always worth noting that, because that often gives you a little clue as you go through. So painting a picture of somebody, it is like doing a painting. The elements might be the first wash on the canvas before you start adding buildings or whatever it is. Okay. And the first wash may be important. Anyway, if you're a fiery type, well, fire rises, you know. So enthusiastic, warm, inspirational, confident. The fire person tends to have faith in life, faith that things will work out all right in the end. They tend to be idealistic and they're a visionary. They're concerned with the future. No, heat goes upwards. The earth, well, we walk on it, we grow things in it. The earthy person is realistic, dependable, security oriented, and by security I mean material security. They want to know where the next jam butt is coming from. So the earth person is very at home in the material world. You can imagine what it might be like not to have earth or not to have fire. The airy person, maybe I should remind you of the signs: Gemini, Libra, Aquarius. The fire is Aries, Leo, Sagittarius, Earth, Taurus, Virgo, Capricorn. Air, yeah, Gemini, Libra, Aquarius. The air signs are very concerned with communication. And in fact, most instruments, the sound made by most instruments is actually air moving. So the air signs tend to be concerned with communication and ideas. They tend to be very rational and civilized. They can, an airy person, somebody who's strongly airy, can see your point of view even if they don't agree with it. So they can see things in perspective and proportion. And people who lack air have difficulty doing that. Okay. And the watery person, often concerned with feelings. Do I like this? Do I love this? They're impressionable, will often be sympathetic and responsive. So they might seek emotional security. You know, when you think about water, it needs a vessel, doesn't it? You know, if I put water in a vase that's that shape, well, the water becomes that shape. That's about relationship. So the water element is concerned with relationship, really, because they need emotional security and to belong. I mean, the word belonging is a very Cancerian word. The water signs are Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. Water signs tend to be a bit secretive and protective. So there you are. That's a little bit on the elements. And I don't know whether to do the quadruplicities. Probably not really. So, but it's not about where your sun sign is, really. Although that certainly, you know, if you've got sun in Sagittarius, that certainly gives us fiery thing. But maybe you don't have any other planet in Sagittarius. So maybe fire isn't your strongest element. So, but it might be. Okay. All right.
Can I, sorry, I have another question. Because I mentioned in the introduction that you had an interest in homeopathy.
Yeah.
So Afra was just asking, what is relationship with homeopathy?
Well, there isn't one really, right. Except, what shall I say? The homeopath has to, ideally, at best, you know, at best, ideally finds a remedy that completely matches you, all of you. Okay, it's known as the simillimum, ideally. So the remedy should, in a way, mirror you. And if you've just got an acute problem, you've got the flu or food poisoning, it should certainly mirror how you're feeling now. Okay, there's a mirroring there. And if you're reading a horoscope for a client, really what you're trying to do is to mirror them in the same way. So that's why I would say there's a similarity there. I mean, I also quite like portrait photography, or well, I'm trying to learn to draw and paint because that's what I like. I like to capture the individual. And the thing about the horoscope, the thing about astrology, it shows you how that people are very different. It helps you understand. You can't really be a decent astrologer and judge. You're kind of using judgment to decide, does this mean X or does this mean Y, but not in terms of judgment. You know, and every planet and every sign is good or useful, but it can also be difficult. Depends how we use things. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. And again, in the introduction, I mentioned that you read a lot of books on the subject in your teenage years. Do you have any books to recommend to the audience tonight?
Well, it depends what they want to learn about, really. If they want a crash course in astrology, they could buy one of my books, which is called The Contemporary Astrologer's Handbook. But, you know, there's millions of books out there, and a lot of them aren't very good, but authors like Liz Green, Howard Susportus, Stephen Arroyo, those are very good writers. But they don't tend to do beginners very much. And Linda Goodman's Sun Signs is still, even though it's a bit old-fashioned, I mean, I was reading it 50 years ago, more than 50 years ago. So it's still pretty good as a sun sign book, if that's what you want.
Yeah. It's an immensely complicated business, isn't it, astrology?
Well, it is and it isn't. It's like learning a language. I mean, it isn't. It's just, well, it takes, if you wanted to become really good at it, all of it. When I say all of it, I don't mean horror-y or all sorts of things, but I mean being able to make sense to some extent of a chart and to some extent forecasting. You need a few years, really. If you wanted to get qualified, maybe a bit longer than that, but it depends how much time you put into something. It's like any subject, yeah.
I get the sense that it's, sorry, that's a bit crude, but it's more than just intuition. It's not. It's more.
It's not intuition. No.
No, it's much more than that, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's not. It's not intuition, really. It does. Over time, it does sort of sharpen your intuition a little bit. But no, I wouldn't say I was particularly intuitive, really. Average, perhaps, but no. And the other thing about astrology is people bring to it their particular attributes and skills and so on. You know, well, I suppose like if you took up gardening, you'd still bring something of yourself to it. You know, not every gardener does the same thing.
So the charts would, for an individual, the chart would be the same, but a particular chart would be viewed differently by two astrologers. They would interpret
maybe slightly, yeah. A lot. Hopefully, they'd say the same. But hopefully, they'd say the same, roughly. But their emphasis may be different.
Yes.
Although part of the skill is knowing what to emphasize. You know, maybe your hobby is knitting, say, but knitting may not be the most important thing in your life. It's unlikely to be the most important thing in your life. And even if it is, why is it? It's the why that's one's interested in, you know. You know, if you go around murdering people, a horoscope will help understand why.
Yeah, so it's a sort of an interrogative technique in a sense, is it? Then you're suggesting things to people and they're running with it, or you as a
no, not quite.
no.
Okay, and as we're saying, we all work differently. I mean, nowadays I tend to do more problem solving. I don't really like going, oh, you've got the sun in this and that and that. I study the chart myself. And if people want me to do that, I'll do that. But really what I like to do is, well, why are you coming to me now? What is the issue? And work like that. So, a lot of astrologers, including me, are trained counselors and all that kind of stuff. So it's not quite counseling because it's more directive and proactive, in what I say. I don't just mirror back what, the counsellor will mirror back what you've said. I don't really do that. As I say, so some astrologers, we all work a bit differently. That's what I mean by working differently. It's not that we necessarily come to different interpretations exactly, although we might. But it's more what you do with that. I'm not a very talkative person, believe it or not, and I get sick of the sound of my own voice, which is partly what took me to homeopathy, really, because as a homeopath, I hardly have to say anything. I just have to listen, absolutely listen. The way I work with astrology, sometimes is because one of the difficulties is that people often go to astrologers because they think the astrologer has all the answers and they forget they've got free will. So I would say one of the important things is to say, well, I'm a map reader and you do have free will, and let's see how you can use X or how you can use Y. Often you're giving people permission for something they want to do anyway. You're helping boost their confidence. Like, for example, let's imagine you wanted to be a motor mechanic. And I says, well, you make a fantastic mechanic, for example. And then if you heard me or the astrologer say that, you'd think, oh, God, I've always wanted to do that. Maybe I should. So.
I see. Yes, that's clear. Yes. Can I just ask anybody? Does anybody have any questions? Do you want to open up the mics and ask a question of Sue? Does anybody have anything to ask? Susan Pine.
Hello. I'd just like to ask: is there a decent astrology program out there? Years ago, I did use the Halloran one, but that's very out of date, I think. So,
what you mean to calculate charts?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't put anything else. I'm really good at maths.
Well, there are quite a few. The best one, in my view, the one I use, is Solar Fire.
Right, thanks for that.
That'll set you back about £200, I think. But of course, you can all get your horoscope done free on the internet with Astrology. I think, let me just see if I can write on here. That's, mind you have to make sure you know your time and the place and so on. But you can get a chart free online. It may not be written quite as you want, and it may not do everything. Well, it won't. But a lot of people sort of interested in astrology might do that. There's another program called Astrocalc that I think is free. But it's a little bit limited. So if you want state-of-the-art program, the one I was using tonight, Solar Fire.
Thank you. Sorry.
Thanks for that, Sue.
You're welcome.
Thank you. We've got a question from Sue Brown.
Hi, Sue.
Hi. I know there was a full moon today, half past
Yes.
12. I wondered if you'd like to comment about that.
Well, you can set up a chart for the full moon. I haven't done anything like that. Full moons, so the full moon, the sun and moon are opposite each other in the chart. Okay. And this was at about, the moon was about 24 of Aries, which is opposite the sign of Libra, where the sun was. Where it becomes important is if it's sitting on something in your horoscope. That can be a trigger to something. And new moons can as well. That can be important. And obviously not just for individuals. Politically, it can be important. And you can say things about full moons generally, like it's a great time to have a party. Various research has shown that quite a large amount of post-operative bleeding occurs at full moon. It's just everything runs. Everything's out there. And casualty departments in hospitals or in psychiatric units, there's more going on. It's like a party. So, as I say, a way to use it is to have a party.
Yes.
Okay.
It's just that I gather that this particular full moon, the sun in Libra and the moon in Aries, is square Pluto,
it is square Pluto,
and Mars in Cancer. So it's a really difficult full moon.
Not necessarily. It's not. Well, it's not tightly. It's there's a 6-degree orb, which we do allow. The square from the sun and moon to Pluto is a 6-degree orb, but it's not tight. It depends whether it's picking you up or not, or a given country you're interested in, or a given thing. So I've seen more difficult full moons. Yeah, one of the reasons why it's being mentioned is because the moon is close to the Earth, much closer than it always is. Right. So the moon is about 240,000 miles away from the Earth, but in the elliptical orbit, sometimes it will be closer and sometimes it will be further away, and at the moment it's closer. So that's created a buzz and stuff. I haven't really thought about it. It might mean something in its own.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thanks, Sue. Got a question, I think, from Beata.
Thank you so much. So I must introduce myself. So I'm Hungarian origin, so my accent is Hungarian, but I'm very welcome to be here. I'm hoping welcome to be here in this group. So my question
so are you in Hungary now?
No, I'm in London.
Mm-hmm.
In London.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So very much in London. And so I have one question, because I can see the further future. And unfortunately, I can see sometimes in 2, 3, 4, 5 months. So my question is, in your astrology, can you see the further future in your astrology or not?
Well, as I say, yes and no, because you have free will. So it's a bit of an insult to you if I can.
It's not about human. It's not. It's about what is coming up in the life, like coming up in the future, in major
to some extent. To some extent, yes. I might sort of see when you're going to move house, or when you're going to change job, or get promoted, maybe. Things to do with your parents. I might be able to see, or your partner, I might be able to see. But you do have free will. So my job is to encourage you to use that.
I see. So What age of that?
Do you know what time you're born?
I know very well. I don't tell you now. Sorry.
You don't want to tell me, okay.
Yeah, so basically, yeah, it's just amazing when we can see future events in a couple of months' time. Yes.
Well, sometimes you can.
This, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. So
Well, I could set up your chart, Beata.
no.
No, okay.
Independent discussion between each other.
Okay.
I just say
maybe not appropriate. Okay, not appropriate.
There is a possibility to say C.
Yeah. Okay.
Just today in astrology.
So there is not an easy answer to that. Sometimes one can.
Thank you. So thank you. But that was it. What my message was. Yes,
okay.
Okay. Oh, thank you, Beata. It just reminded me of a story my dad told me when he was a teenager. He went to see a clairvoyant in London, and the clairvoyant pretty much sketched out his whole life quite accurately.
Okay. Well,
so despite having free will.
Yeah. Well, you know, Jung
makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah. But Jung would say we have free will, but not the will to use it. Okay. We have free will, but not the will to use it. And you see, if a clairvoyant tells you something and you believe in the whole process, you might actually make that happen.
Yeah, sure.
You might.
Yeah.
Okay.
For sure, yeah. Can I ask, has anybody else got a question? We're getting towards the end now, but has anybody got another question?
I mean, going back to Beata's thing,
okay.
You see, the astrologer might say, well, this is a good time to do X. That's the sort of thing you might see. You see what's going on in the person's chart, and you might think, well, this is a good time to do X or Y. So that is sort of doing something consciously rather than being at the receiving end of a planet. So somebody was a bit frightened about Pluto a minute ago. Well, maybe if you've got major Pluto transits, it depends your age, really. But that's another story. But depending on what Pluto's doing, it might be a very good idea to do some research, to do some digging, to find out the family history, for example. A good time to go into therapy, to dig around yourself in a way. A good time to do the garden, compost. Compost is dead matter, really, and so on and so forth. So the astrologer will, you know, that's partly how one works, really.
Sorry, can I just ask a very quick one? Is there more interest in astrology nowadays, do you think? Is the interest?
No, I don't think so. I think it's probably about the same. I think it might have been bigger in the 80s, really. When students take up astrology, because they've discovered all these other people in their class and other classes, they think, oh, yes, it's taking off. But I don't know that it is, really. I think it will never die out. You know, an astrology conference in the UK, you probably get about, well, I'm not sure now because they're often online as well as in person, but you used to get about 300 people. I think you still would. And, you know, you'll have hundreds. Well, I used to run a live school, not the one I started, one before that, the faculty. And I used to, at one point, I had 5 beginners classes, not me teaching them necessarily. I had a lot of teachers. And the diploma class, which would take another 2 to 3 years, and lots of students on that too. So, and that was live classes, and lots of students used to learn by correspondence. Now, of course, they do it digitally.
Yeah. Thank you. So last call for any more questions. If you put your hand up. But oh, wait a minute. Oh, we have a message. The question is, what is a yod, a Y-O-D?
A yod.
Yes.
It's a particular relationship of 3 planets. You've got 2 planets that are 60 degrees apart. So that's 2 signs, so 30 degrees in a sign. So you've got 2 planets that are 30 degrees apart, and they're both 150 degrees from a 3rd planet, or 5 signs. So it's like a triangle. It's not a triangle exactly, but that's what a yod is. And the top of the yod, where both the planets are coming in, is often described as mental block, brain's gone. It's like it kind of points in a particular direction sometimes.
Okay. Well, I'm not surprised you're going some mental blocks. It's coming up towards 9 o'clock, and
yeah.
We've got some nice comments in the chat about your talk. Some nice praise there. So
thank you. I could do one on homeopathy too, if you ever want that. Anyway.
We'll come back to you. Yes, next year.
Okay. Well, it's nice meeting you, those I've met, and thank you all for being here, and have a nice life.